Hey, Bina. Bina?
Hi.
Yeah,
Can you
how
hear me?
long? The thing is planned for 1 hour, 30 minutes. Is that right?
75.
Okay.
So you've got until 11:55, 45 minutes, and then Q&A.
Okay. How many people are we expecting?
We had about 26 sign up. We've got 10 people online at the minute.
Oh,
Hi,
wow.
everybody.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Hi, Bina. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Quite a few names on there. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Morning.
Okay. Hi, Phil. Okay. I think we'll start now. So thank you all for giving up your bank holiday and joining us today. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of housekeeping, just to make you aware that I do have to do this little bit of housekeeping. So this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel. Please turn off your video if you're not comfortable with being recorded. If anyone wishes to discuss any sensitive issues during our Q&A and you don't want it to be uploaded to YouTube, please just tell us beforehand and we can edit that section out of our recording. So this can stay a safe space for you to, be open. So everyone is muted. As you can appreciate, it's not possible to conduct a meeting when everyone's mic is on. You can post questions via the chat facility. However, you will have the opportunity to ask questions later on. So just to make you aware that please do not post any links or images on the chat or you will be removed from the meeting. Just a reminder that we are active on social media. Please follow us on Twitter at ARCCLTD, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So today we've got the workshop with Gurpreet Singh, which is conflict management, and it's part of our Here to Talk initiative by ARCC. This project is to raise awareness of mental health issues in the Asian and Croydon communities. Our aim is to bring mental health topics to everyday conversations without having a stigma attached to it. This is so that we have an understanding of signs to look out for the most common issues faced by our community and our loved ones. We can all become a champion for our families, friends, and our colleagues. So I'm just going to introduce our speaker, which is Gurpreet, and then I'll hand you over to Gurpreet. So Gurpreet works as a counsellor and a psychotherapist and has a private practice in central London and West London, where he works with couples and individuals. He is a qualified Kundalini yoga teacher and a mindfulness coach. Gurpreet also works as a business consultant and coach. He delivers training workshops and talks on a variety of topics to understand and improve mental health and relationships. He has appeared on TV, radio shows, and is widely quoted by various media channels like BBC, Financial Times, The Economist, The Guardian, etc. When not counselling, he is a keen cyclist and a DIY enthusiast. So I'll just hand you over to Gurpreet, who will be online to take you through the workshop until about 11:55, and then we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. Thank you, Gurpreet. You're on mute.
Try it. Version 2. Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many people online. So this is a conflict management workshop. Tell me, to begin with, who had a conflict about attending this workshop this morning? Did anyone have a conflict of interests deciding whether you should do this, or would you rather be sitting out in the sun or doing something else with the weekend?
Everybody wants to spend time with you, Gurpreet.
Aren't I lucky? I think it was something else. I think there was an interest in this workshop about how to handle conflict. So we're going to be looking at some issues relating to that. But before we start, what I want to say is there, I mean, I don't know what, by show of hands, or if you want to say something, who's looking for what kind of conflict? What kind of conflict are you interested in? Because conflict can take lots of different themes, right? You can have conflict with self, you can have conflict with another, you can have conflict with a group of people, you can have conflict between organizations, between nations, as we know what's going on in the world at the moment. What kind of conflict interests you today? It's a question. So if somebody would like to say something, Jay, you've got your hand raised, so why don't you go?
Myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Yeah, Gurpreet, the reason I'm on this particular training course because I do training in conflict management.
Oh, do you? Okay.
But I come from a different angle, not mental health. As a professional licensing consultant, I have to worry about the clients that have a license for, say, for example, retail of alcohol.
Right.
So when people are managing a restaurant or a nightclub or a pub, for example, any venue that is selling alcohol, and I have to train the staff to make sure that they are aware of what conflict management is all about, because they would have customers that either behave badly, and as you know, conflict is, it takes two people to have a conflict.
Yeah.
Okay? And you mentioned some of those things, is when there is either a conflict between two different guests or patrons, between staff and the guest, if you like, or somebody who is visiting the pub or a restaurant. It might be with a security staff before they enter the premises. So there's a number of ways that conflict can take place on a licensed premises. And there is a reason for how the staff need to manage it, how to diffuse that particular situation, how to record that particular incident if it is a serious issue in terms of somebody was assaulted or there was a damage to the property or things like that. So that's the angle I'm coming in. I'm sorry to take too long to describe what I'm coming
fine.
in.
So well, thank you for that, Jay. So I understand that, you know, between staff and guest, or, you know, two groups of, could be a group of people and an individual, or could be between individuals, is what you're referring to here, right? So anybody else got any take on?
So we've got a couple of things on the chat. So Phil said conflict in a group setting, which is quite important, I think, for most of us. And then Laura suggested conflict in daily life with family members, examples of spouses, partners, children, co-workers, boss, or employers and employees in general, kind of thing, which is, I think, quite useful for all of us.
Right.
Because I think family conflict is quite a good one, isn't it? Teenage children, I think, would be a big, yeah.
So
that's probably a.
Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah. Okay,
so
cool.
we're going to look at some ideas, and somebody else is talking about a group as well. Phil is saying something about a group. So look, we're going to be covering some of these things, and some of these topics will be around, you know, what is conflict, you know, what makes up a conflict, and how to what can escalate it. So we'll look at a few ideas. I think we've already run workshops in anger management and other stuff, and we can come back to, and stress, and we can come back to those should there be a need. But let's just begin by looking at what conflict is, and also, you know, sometimes what it takes to resolve a conflict. So let's go with, can everyone see my screen? Yep. Okay. So what is, before we can understand conflict, right, or learn to work with it, we need to understand what conflict is and what conflict management is. So conflict is when two or more values, perspectives, and or opinions are contradictory in nature and have not been aligned. So somebody mentioned groups, somebody mentioned families. When a teenage child wants to go out and stay out later at night, and the parent, out of safety concerns or whatever reasons, wants the child to come home early, there is a conflict in value, isn't there? The child wants freedom and the parents don't want to give the freedom. So there is a conflict of values. There's a conflict of perspective as well, because the teenager may have a view that the parents can't see. So perspectives can change ideas and opinions. I mean, whether you believe that you should vote for Tory government or Labour government, that's contradictory in nature, isn't it? So, and your values may be out of alignment with each other. So that can create conflict. So conflict is when two or more values, perspectives, and or opinions are contradictory in nature and have not been aligned. And what is conflict management? Is knowing that conflict or potential for conflict exists. So it's not just knowing that conflict exists, but knowing that, I mean, Jay, you were referring to an off license or a pub situation. And when people have had alcohol, the potential for conflict will increase. So what will increase the potential for conflict? And learning how to manage it decreases the odds of a non-productive escalation. So there is productive escalation and there is non-productive escalation. And what's the difference? Okay, so let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So what is the primary causes for conflict? Personality or approach conflict. It can be communication failure, which is number one reason for a lot of conflicts. People have not been informed. People don't understand. They misunderstand. And there is a difference, right? Not understanding is different from misunderstanding. Not understanding means you told me something and I didn't quite understand. But misunderstanding means you told me something and I drew a different meaning from that than what you intended. So not being informed, not understood, or misunderstood, or fed by a rumor mill, which means you might have asked, I don't know, Auntie Jane about something, and that was not necessarily the truth. What you got was nonsense. And you didn't actually ask the source, about what is actually true here. So while we look at, communication, I want to talk about intention and perception and what's the difference. So intention is something that I have when I tell you something. There is an intention in the running this workshop today. There is an intention on running it, for the group of people that are attending. The perception is what you take from it. So the reason why we're running it is to inform and give our community the skills. Your perception is how you're going to take what you learned today and apply it to your particular situation. So my intention is never going to be the same as your perception. So the person who's communicating their intention and the person who's receiving the information, their perception is always going to be out of whack. But we tend to largely assume that for the person who's communicating, that the intention, because we have the intention we do, we think the other person automatically understands the intention. And that's, in my experience, not always the case. It often comes up between spouses, between partners, between children and parents, that the intention is different from the perception. And so few people pay attention to this. So when you are not sure that your intention has been received by the person who's receiving the information, then it is a good idea to check. And these are some of the tools we're going to be talking about later on. Let's carry on with conflict causes. Unfair expectations. What you think you're going to get out of a situation and what I think you're going to get out of a situation might be two different things. This is ideal for conversations between partners, between parents and children, between groups of people at work. We might have unfair expectations out of everything. Or maybe just one situation. You might think that we were going to go out for dinner and I said, let's go out for drinks. That's unfair expectations from one of us, isn't it? Or misunderstood, miscommunication. Then there is power plays, right? That's where conflict can also rise from. Power plays are about people just wanting to feel important. people not wanting to relinquish control, people not wanting to give in. That's power play. Resource, when you got too much or too little, both can cause conflict. When you don't have enough money to spend, you might end up in a conflict on where you're going to spend it. You might have a different opinion from, let's say, your peer or your sibling or someone else in the family. And if there is too much, then what? Abundance of resources can also create conflict. If you choose to, I don't know, if you've got plenty of money and you choose to travel club class, that might be conflict with someone else who thinks that's a waste of money. Clash of values. Covered this a little bit. You can have values on lots of things. One person might be too religious in the family than the other person. That can bring on a clash of values. Somebody might have an eco-friendly drive and the other person doesn't. That's a clash of values. Unclear goals. You don't know what you're aiming for. Why are we doing this? The goals might be unclear. So one person might feel that there is no value in doing it because it doesn't help you achieve the goal. The other person might feel that there is a lot to be gained from it. That's a clash of values and a clash of goals. You don't have to take one box. You might take 2 or 3 boxes when conflict arises. Then, of course, is the fear of unknown. Somebody may not want to take an action or might be afraid, and the fear will then drive the conflict. You don't want to do something because you're afraid. That can drive the conflict. And all these communications, conversations, conflicts, they happen on the fabric of trust. There is a trust in, I would say, even in this presentation that I'm delivering. For those of you who've been here for a few minutes and have heard me talk, and I've heard Bina talk, you're a little bit more settled into the conversations, which means you have a little bit more trust. You've heard me talk for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Your trust for me might be developing, or I might be losing it from you. So trust is so essential to the fabric, or the lack of it, that the lack of trust can bring on conflict, and the presence of it can take away conflict. Because you trust someone, you don't have to get into a conflict. And because you don't trust someone, conflict will arise. So trust, which is such an important part of any relationship, is really important to conflict. You might even trust someone not to trust them. Well, then that's the trust we're talking about here. So the lack of trust, again, in this case, can bring on conflict. Like I said, it's the fabric of all relationship. When you have trust, amazing things can happen. And in this case, we're talking about the good trust. And without it, partners can fall apart, families can fall apart. What is destructive conflict versus what you might deem as constructive conflict? In a destructive conflict, it diverts energy. You've got an example of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine as a destructive conflict. People are losing lives, livelihood. Deepens difference, deepens alienation. I mean, all these stories are all on the front line of our newspaper these days. It polarizes groups. So when you end up in conflict, people don't talk to each other. Or there can be violent protests. It polarizes groups, it destroys morale. It can also energize people. I mean, after all, conflict is adrenaline fuel, so people can also get energized by destructive conflict. But it does not lead to constructive outcomes. It generally leads to negative outcomes. So when people get energized and they have violent interactions, they often lead to negative outcomes. Somebody gets hurt. And out of control conflicts, which means conflicts that you cannot control, often yield to negative outcomes. Conflict that you can control and manage can lead to better outcomes. But out of control conflicts will often lead you to the same place with negative outcomes. Constructive conflict. It opens up issues of importance. which leads you to the idea that actually conflict might not be a bad thing. It invites dialogue. You can end up in a conflict with your partner over where to go for dinner. It doesn't have to end up in you divorcing each other. It just means you have to negotiate this idea, right? Opens up issues of importance. By arguing about something, the couple may be able to arrive at something that they've been trying to understand about each other. Having worked with couples, I can tell you the couples that don't argue often tend to be more challenging to work with, shall we say, because when they're not arguing, you don't know what they're not arguing about. What is it that's unspoken between them? For a couple that's arguing, when they arrive into my counseling room, it's much easier to work with because I already know what the issues are. The couples that don't say anything, often I have to first find out what is the issue, and that can take a while because there's so much silence in the room. So I would say that conflict is actually sometimes a good thing. It opens up issues of importance, invites dialogue, creates clarification. You can both get to a better place. Brings on cohesion because you can learn to work together through conflict. Invites re-examining and reassessment. And you can do all of that. And it increases involvement because if you can argue in the right way, you can have conflict in the right way, and you can make each other feel heard, you can actually increase involvement. It takes different personalities to make any organization succeed. What people don't realize is that when you bring different personalities on board, there is going to be some element of conflict. You can't bring on people who think and feel like you or look like you or any of those things, because that's not a successful company. Yes, you can all think the same, you never fall out with each other, but where's the cohesion in that? The next thing I want to talk about is conflict management style. And I'm going to talk about these 5 things, right? And we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail as we go on. So you can essentially have 5 conflict management styles. The first is to avoid. You can pretend that there is no conflict. Avoid it. Ability to withdraw, sidestep, or leave it for whatever reason. The reason is not relevant. You avoid it. So when you avoid it, I don't know what to put a plus minus there. It basically means that you will both lose. If you avoid it, rarely does it go away. Sometimes it does, but rarely does it go away. And everyone ends up losing. You and the person you're having the conflict with. Accommodate. You can be selfless about it. You can obey, you can forget about yourself, and you can yield. You can accommodate. Does it work? Selflessness? I'm afraid I don't necessarily buy into that idea, and we can talk about that later on. Compete. Arguing and debating, using rank. I'm the boss, therefore this is the way we're going to do it. Asserting. I'm the parent, so just listen to me. You might win, but the other person loses. So when you end up in a competition with someone else, you might win, yes. But is it cohesion? Not sure. You can compromise, you can negotiate and find middle ground, which means both of you will have to give up a little bit. You can both win, but you can also both lose. When you find middle ground, you have to give up some of your own ground to come to the middle, right? So compromise, I would say, is not a bad idea, but there is a better idea in collaboration when you work together. When you agree for a common goal, a common purpose, common value, then you can work together and you can both win. So the ideal outcome is when you collaborate and you work together. Compromise, compete, accommodate can also work. Avoidance, not so much. So let's look at it in a little bit more detail. Avoid. You think you can ignore it? It will go away. I mean, if you have a condition and you don't go get it checked out, it's not going to go away. Well, you might get lucky and it might, but often it grows in intensity and has worse outcomes. If you confront it, someone might get hurt. Why bother? Nothing will change. That might be also an attitude that you can take. But often you lose and they lose. Everyone loses in avoid situations. Accommodate. It's easier to give in. You can be seen to be taking the moral high ground. It's selfless idea, right? And I'm not sure about that. You can agree to be liked, because if you agree to something, then you might think that the other person might like you. They win this time, you win next time. Will there be a next time? Will you ever win? Or do you always keep giving in? So there is a spectrum, right? In a self, there is a selfless idea, and then there is a selfish idea. And it's my opinion that either of those two spectrums is bad. If you always giving in to be liked, then you're always being selfless. And if you're always wanting your own way, it's selfish. And I would rather take the middle ground, that sometimes I'm selfless, and sometimes I'm selfish. I could do a whole workshop around that, frankly, but let's just take the summary news from that. That being completely selfless, I'm not sure is a good idea. I would rather frame it as accommodating. I would rather frame it as, not even accommodating is the wrong word here, but I would rather frame it as knowing what I'm doing, and I'm going to go along with it this time, but that doesn't mean, this is the way I want to do it. I'd rather, collaborate with you and come to something that will work for both of us. Then you have compromise. A compromise is fair. It creates a level playing field because both of you give up something. You give up something, and so do they. But it can breed resentment, as can accommodation. Like I said, you can win, both of you, but you will both also lose. Then you have compete. Then you're like forceful and just want your own way. There is only one solution, and that's yours. And you can become the almighty powerful and want your own way. You might win, but they will lose in this. Collaborate. Find a solution that works for both of us, increase understanding, find common ground, and working together. Often this leads to you win, they win. And this is the style. So charting the style, this gives you an understanding. On the bottom, we have cooperative. On the left, we've got assertiveness. And you can see how the 5 styles sit together. The avoidance style is a red zone. Compete, compromise, accommodate. In the right context, one of those will work, and that's why I've made them orange. But collaborate is the green, because that's where you should be heading for. So you should be moving from avoid to collaborate. But there are the other 3 situations, which in some of the contexts, frankly, can work. You can accommodate, you can compromise, you can compete. For example, compete. When it's as a boss, if it's my responsibility, then I don't mind taking ownership and pulling rank and saying, this is the way I want to do it. So as a boss, I might be okay with competing. As an employee or working for my boss, I might be okay to accommodate. So those 2 circumstances can work in the right context. I can also compromise, which is also okay. But it's the collaborate one that is the most powerful. What is your style? I give you a few instances, right? Do you use the same style in every situation? Do you always want your own way? Do you always want to compete? And does it always work for you? And do you think there is a different style to be adopted in different situations? It's the avoidance one I said. That's the one you got to watch out for. The other 4, in the right context, they can all work. So examine your style. And if you want to change your style, if you want to arrive at a better place, then use simple, actionable steps to change. The whole world doesn't have to change just for you to accommodate a new style. Try collaboration. See how that'll work for you. And we're going to go into it, how we can arrive there in a bit. So this is the trade-off, right? When you end up in conflict, you're going to have to decide what is important. Is the relationship important or is the task important? Because if the relationship importance is low and the task importance is low, you might smooth over something. When the relationship importance is high, but the task importance is low, you end up withdrawing, which means you want to save the relationship and not focus on the task. When the task prioritization is high and the relationship importance is low, you go for forcing, because you'll want to force your way through because you don't really care about the relationship. The task is much more important. But if the relationship importance is high and the task importance is high, then you might want to go for problem solving. And anywhere in the middle is compromise. So this is the trade-off. What is more important, the relationship or the task? And like I said, you can have different situations with, with different needs. Sometimes you may want to concentrate on the relationship. You may want to pick your battles. You may not want to argue about every single thing. But there are some things where the task is just important. You need to get it done. So I think I said this right at the beginning of the workshop, which is, where can conflict occur? Conflict can occur within yourself. We often don't pay attention to that one, I have conflict with myself every day. This morning when I woke up, the conflict was, should I get out of bed or should I not? Or should I have another 10 minutes in bed? That's a conflict, isn't it? A part of me that wanted to be lazy won, and I stayed in bed for an extra 10 minutes. But the second time the conversation happened, I got out of bed. That's a very small conflict. There are bigger conflicts. Shall I apply for this job or not? Shall I go out tonight or not? What kind of a relationship do I want to have with my partner? Or any of those conversations. That's conflict within yourself. That's got nothing to do with someone else. Should I stay or should I go? That's a conflict. At a party, should I stay because even though I'm getting bored, or should I leave and go somewhere more interesting? That's a conflict. You can have conflict with another person, which we already mentioned, between groups, teams, families, tribes, religions, countries. It can happen between leaders. It can happen between nations. A conflict between head of the families can often invite all the other members of the family to participate, right? I'm sure you know of some families like that, where the head of the families have fallen out and everyone else underneath falls out as well. Between leaders, same thing happens. Leaders fall out, and the nations go to war. It can happen between nations. One group of people just don't like another group of people. That's just it. North Korea and South Korea is a good example. It's the first two within yourself and with another person that I'll be concentrating on, but I'll pick up some of the other ideas. So developmental stages, how does a conflict escalate, right? So potential of conflict. There are explosive situations. Two groups of people turn up, a left-wing group and a right-wing group turn up at the same place. It's an explosive situation. You can expect conflict. If nothing is done to address the situation, conflict will emerge. If police presence is not enough to offset any aggression, the conflict will emerge. They will fight each other. This is also inevitable conflict, right? So potential is when it's an explosive situation, but there are mitigating circumstances which will help the conflict not get to its full threat. But inevitable conflict is when that threat is absent, when that mitigating circumstance is absent, the conflict is going to happen. It's easily triggered, which means it just needs someone to do something stupid and there'll be a full-blown conflict. And then there is after the conflict. The conflict subsides, but it's not resolved, which means that the issue is not finished. And it's likely that the next time the threat comes around, it will be greater than the last time because because there is residual anger from the previous situation that is coming into the present situation. So after the conflict, sometimes it can be worse than the previous version. So you've got to be really careful of that. You've got to be really careful of residual anger from an unresolved situation going to the next situation. Happens in families, couples, organizations, and people all the time. It's not uncommon, when couples argue, when they pull out previous instances of unresolved arguments and they will say, remember when you did that, and remember when you did that, and all that resentment will come out again. So conflict is subsided, but not resolved. And therefore, the potential for it to come back is even greater than before. And so let's have a look at examples of conflict itself. So these are some of the reasons. This is not an exhaustive list, and it doesn't mean you need to tick only one category at a time. But when you're having a conflict with yourself, normally it is along the lines of a moral conflict. You might consider yourself to be an honest person, and you might find yourself lying. That's a moral conflict. You know, if your sons, I mean, you've heard stories about parents turning in their children when they've done something wrong. Can you imagine that parent who's turned their child in to the police, that they must have had to have a moral conflict battle within themselves before they could arrive at a decision? Then you can have a conflict with yourself about resource usage. You've got £5 in your pocket. You want to take the train home or you want to get dinner? Which one is it going to be? Monetary terms, resource usage is easy to look at. What if you've got 30 minutes and you can only do one thing? What would it be that you do? Religious conflict. You might have a religious opinion, but science is telling you something else, and you may or may not want to go down that path. Political conflict. You might always vote for a party, but that party is behaving in a way that you don't like, or they're doing things that you don't agree with. Party loyalty conflict. Relationship conflict. Loving someone or not. You love them and you hate them at the same time. That's a conflict, isn't it? Self-image, contradictory behavior. So if I'm an honest person and I lie, what image am I creating for myself? And am I comfortable with that? Then there is existential conflict. Hating and loving life at the same time. What if I'm terminally ill? I might hate for what's happening to me and I love living. Creates a conflict, doesn't it? It stops me from making peace with my existential situation. Most of these conflicts can be resolved or accepted, but they're conflict nonetheless. If they're not resolved, I mean, I've worked with people who go through existential conflict, who are not settled, who haven't accepted for the way life has become for them. And it's a real struggle for them. So when it's not resolved or accepted, it creates a lot of unhappiness for them. So conflict with yourself will create a lot of unhappiness for you. It will keep you up at nights. When you're not clear about what you want to do, it will keep you up at nights. It can make your life miserable. If the conflict is of a severe nature, it can make your life miserable. For example, I don't know, a person who loves their children, but thinks that the relationship is over with their partner and they want to leave. And that conflict can make your life pretty miserable because you want to stay and leave in equal measures. So resolving conflict with self, what does it take, right? You name it, you write it down and you summarize it in 3 sentences. Why do you summarize it in 3 sentences? Because when you try and explain the conflict to someone else, it just takes 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you can talk for a long time. But when you summarize it in 3 sentences, you often get to the heart of the matter. You draw a matrix, you work out the pros and cons. What will it be? And is your fear deciding, or you are? But the one thing I can tell you, I've worked with people, and the one thing that keeps coming back to me, as long as someone stays close to their value systems, what they value the most, if they stay close to that, then often you can work with the rest. But if you abandon your value, that then changes you as a person and can also create a lot of unhappiness and misery for you. So whatever else you do, stay close to your values. I don't know what I'm doing here. So this is about conflict with the other. It's missing a heading and I don't know why. But so when you work with the other, just go one step. Yeah. So identify the conflict or the potential. right? Prevent it if possible. Now, these are the steps how we're going to look at, resolving the conflict with the other. So the missing headline here is how to resolve the conflict with the other. So identify the conflict or the potential, prevent it if possible, spend the time to understand it, have a discussion with the other, develop the right frame of mind, agree ground rules, and prepare for the discussion. And then have the discussion and evaluate and resolve. So we're going to be going through the steps. So the first step is conflict with the other. Again, just like you have a conflict with yourself, you can have a conflict with someone else for any of these bullets, and could be outside of this. It could be a relationship conflict. It could be a conflict of values. You just believe in different things. It can be an interest value. One person wants to go to dinner, the other person wants to go to theater. It could be a data conflict. You believe something to be true, the other person believes it to be false. That's a data conflict. And you might end up arguing about that. Pseudo conflict, misunderstanding. Structural conflict, you might disagree on how to do a task or a process. You may want to do the same task or the same process, just wanting to do it a different way. Or there could be a power conflict. And there are many other reasons. By no means is this exhaustive. I'm just giving you a few ideas to understand this. And you can include everything that we spoke about the self a few minutes ago. Prevention is always better than cure. You communicate, you listen, you inform and convey. You clear and you align your goals. Make sure there is fairness for everyone, and you demonstrate flexibility, willingness to change, and deal with it in the present. What that means is deal with it now. Don't save a problem for tomorrow, because that's what breeds resentment. Spend the time understanding it, right? So any kind of conflict that you have, and Jay, sometimes this requires a special bit of attention. Spend time understanding what the situation is first. Do self-analysis. What's going on for you? Okay. And we covered this in the previous slide. I'm sorry for the duplication here. So understanding the conflict, what is it that you need for self-analysis? Is it the person? Is it you, or is it the situation? So who do you think needs to address this? How do you feel about this? And what is at stake? What are you going to lose? And what outcome do you seek? So unless you care about the outcome and you reverse engineer it to understand what do you need, you can't figure out what you will need to go do to get to the outcome. Is it the person? Is it you? Or is it the situation? Who do you think needs to change? Because whenever you talk about the other person, if you say it's you who needs to change, you might come across as blaming. And they will not want to work with that. So is it you? Is it the person? Or is it the situation? What is the conflict about? Remember, I spoke about intention and perception very early on. What is the conflict about? What is the reality versus perception? Have they misunderstood something? Who had what intentions? Did you intend to convey something, and did they understand something in the same way? Or is there a difference between these two things? And for some reason, people in conflicts suddenly develop this notion that they are psychic and they know everything. And I don't know how that works. But whenever you're in conflict, people assume that they're psychic and they know how the other person is thinking, or what they believe, or what they think you're thinking. So people suddenly become psychic. Don't be a psychic. Don't assume. Don't assume you know what the other person is thinking. Check, ask. Don't assume, be explicit, not implicit. In every relationship, people become implicit based on what they know about the relationship. They think because they've been, living together for 5 years, they automatically know what the other person is thinking. You don't. Even if you do, you might have some of it right, but you might have some of it wrong too. And your assumptions will lead to an escalation of conflict. It sounds so obvious when you say it, but and people always think that they're psychic, and I'm not excluded from that. Even though I sit here and talk about this, when it comes to my own personal relationships, I am guilty of the same thing, and I have to remind myself that I'm not a psychic either. And I have to check with the other person. So you ask questions. This is what I understand. Is that right? I love this slide. This is one of my, probably my favorite slide. That in this situation, can you see that two people can both have the right answer? That you are right, but so is the other person. And what is the truth is, in fact, is elusive from both of you. And you can end up, this is a circle or this is a square based on your own perception of what you're arguing about. And this could happen between any two groups of people. And this is so important to keep in mind. So when I say this is, you're assuming because you know a little bit of the truth that you know the whole truth, and you don't. And you certainly don't know somebody else's, what is true for someone else. You might know what is true for you, but you can never take ownership for what is true for the other person. And who here, when you're arguing or in conflict, who here can hold their hand and say, I've never interrupted the person I'm arguing with? You're always wanting to interrupt. Oh, I know what you're going to say. Oh, you said this. You just on the mark. You're ready to interrupt. Have you ever wondered what it'll feel like to let the other person finish their sentence, and how important it is to make someone feel heard and, more importantly, listened to in an argument? This is, if you were going to make one change in how you argue and who you argue with, change not interrupting someone and letting them get to the end of their sentence. Make them feel heard, make them feel listened to. This is the single change I will invite you to. So when you have the conversation, I talk about with people about having a conversation to have a conversation, which means agree a time and place. Don't turn up unannounced to have a conversation, a difficult conversation with someone. Be respectful of the other. Manage expectation. Explain the agenda. Say what you're going to achieve, what is the argument about. Identify the goal. Give them time to prepare so they know what they're going to be arguing about. When you go to have a conversation with someone, what you want to leave behind is the need to win. Because everyone wants to win. Nobody wants to lose. Leave behind the need to win. Leave behind the need to punish or control. Also leave behind the assumption that it will not work, because you may have had conversations previously that may not have worked, and you might think that this is not going to work, and you might go in with that assumption. Go in with a positive mindset. Thinking right or wrong. I mean, if you go back to the slide where I said true, and truth, it's like, what's right and wrong? Just because you're right, does that make the other person wrong? Don't think so. There can't be two rights and there can be two wrongs. Now, what do you want to take with you? You want to take with you a willingness to work. That your perception is different from theirs. Your willingness to learn, understand something about the other person. And willingness to see your own contribution to the dynamic that exists between you. Ownership. If I was to sum that up, last bullet in one word, one sentence, one word, I would say ownership. You need ownership of your own actions. So whenever you go into a conversation, you always use I statements, not you statements. Ownership. Then you need ground rules for a conversation, right? When I work with couples, if I tell them to time limit the conversation, it works wonders for them. Suddenly they feel free that they don't have to carry on arguing when they don't want to. So start with 20 minutes and expand it should you want to, but set a timer on 20 minutes. Don't interrupt each other. I spoke about that before, right? Be respectful, agree to narrow or broaden the discussion as you see fit. Stay in the present, focus on the future. Don't talk about what happened 5 years ago. Don't talk about what happened 10 years ago. Talk about what is the present situation, what is bringing you here, and how do you improve it for the future. That's what you want to concentrate on. Agree what to do if you disagree. If you can't reach an agreement at the end, what is the next step? Because it's entirely possible in a conflict, you may not agree to at the end of it, right? So what do you do if you don't agree at the end of it? Are there any variations? This is all before you have the discussion, right? These are the ground rules that you should agree with the other person. Prepare for the discussion. Know how you feel. Know what you want. Do a reality check with yourself. What can be achieved in this discussion? Rehearse situations you will get emotional in. So play them out in your head. Where is it that you will get emotional? And how are you going to work through it or around it? The discussion. So when you actually turn up for the discussion with the other person, define the conflict. Tell them what you're here for. What is the conflict? Why are we arguing today? Communicate what you've understood. Explore solutions and alternates to say, this is the problem. How are we going to solve it? Agree on most workable solution. And agree an evaluation period after that. Say, let's talk about this again in 6 weeks and see where we got to. And how to have it. What is in the discussion? Whenever you say you didn't do this or you didn't do that or you don't behave like this and you don't behave like that, you're always talking about blame. Nobody wants to be blamed. Nobody wants to feel bad about themselves. If you blame, they will fight back. But if you use I sentences, I was really hurt when you did that, is a much more powerful statement to make than you always make me, you always do this to make me feel bad. One sentence is about you, the other sentence is about I. Anything you talk about yourself, you can always have ownership for. Anything that you assume about the other person gives you the ability to be psychic, and you're not. You sentences are always about blame. I sentences are about ownership. Use I sentences. I need this. I want this. I would have liked. Not in a selfish way, but in an ownership way to say, I would really like this if we could work together to achieve, whatever. Or, I get really hurt when you talk to me like that. Talk in the present. Listen and really listen. Not hear, but listen. Work the issue, not the person. Separate the issue from the person. You'll be surprised how much you can achieve if you blame something on a situation, not a person. Mention your feelings. And there should be one action for both, right? Ask for support and don't forget to thank them for having turned up for the meeting. It was as difficult for them as it was for you. Don't forget that. Just because you think it's difficult for you doesn't mean it's not difficult for them. It's difficult for both of you. Listening skills, maintain eye contact, be present, pay attention, listen to what, this sounds so obvious when you say it, but eye contact is so important in listening. Understand what was said, so you can always reflect what was said. So you can listen to what was said, and then you can reflect back to what was said. And seek clarification about what you don't understand. So there's no room for misunderstanding or not understanding. Seek clarification. There is no right or wrong. We already did this. If attacked, people will defend. And don't forget the body language. What you have in the language is only the tip of the iceberg. All the body language, if this kind of body language with crossed arms, standing firm, gives you a closed body language. Whereas if you talk with your hands and you open it up, it just invites more dialogue. So don't forget your body language. And decide how to evaluate. Agree if issue resolved, agree evaluation criteria, and agree evaluation time period. Now remember, conflict is unavoidable. Healthy relationships are not determined by lack of conflict. Just because there is no conflict doesn't mean you're having a healthy relationship. And unhealthy relationships are not determined by presence of conflict. which means if you argue, it doesn't mean it's an unhealthy relationship. I would say good relationships are determined by ability to resolve conflict. So your ability to resolve conflict determines the strength of your relationship, I believe. Often found this to be true about couples. So that's the end of the presentation. So I want to give you one story that might help you all, right? There is this, I used to rent my office in central London. I haven't gone back to that office yet, but I also used to sublet my office to some women who worked in the building, right? And a security guard was a bit of a nightmare to work with, because he was always giving the women a hard time. And I tried to have tell him off, say, look, sort this out, man. Also complained to the management, didn't bring me any results. And I couldn't get him to change his behavior. In the end, I thought I could lodge another complaint with him. I could really do a lot more with this. I thought, well, let me try a different tactic, right? And I did try a different tactic. Every night on my way home, I would make sure that I stop by his desk and say goodnight to him and ask him how he is. Every night I did that. And I would just ask him randomly about anything. I just ask, mostly if it was about the weather. I would ask him if he was going on holiday. I would ask him if he's got a headache. And it took, I'm not kidding you, maybe 8 months. And in 8 months, he was nice to everyone in the office. He would find my lost clients and bring them to my office. And he was completely a changed man. And he would behave completely differently with me. It took 8 months to not have conflict and change behavior. But a small action of saying goodnight to him made him feel noticed. And that's what it took to change behavior. The power of saying goodnight to someone, right? I mean, that is one of the, and I'm telling you a real life story. I actually did this. So this is, when you're trying to resolve conflict, particularly with a family member, I think it's worthwhile looking at the long haul. Don't go for short haul solutions. If you want to make, try and make someone feel important, that they matter in your lives. And you do that by small actions like goodnight actions. Small action over a longer period of time will yield you bigger results than a ginormous action in one go. That's my top tip for you. So I took 5 minutes longer than I was supposed to, but we're here. It's 12 o'clock now, so happy to open it to questions.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Gurpreet. I don't know if anybody's got any questions.
Oops, it's me.
Am I on mute?
So I think my speaker may have gone off. Can I hear you?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can't hear anyone, Peter.
Oh.
And I can hear you.
Yep. Okay. Nobody's put anything on the chat. Is there anybody that wants to ask any questions at all? That was a brilliant session. Thank you so much, Gurpreet. I think it's about making sure that people are involved, isn't it? When you're when you're trying to resolve something, it's really to ensure that people are feeling involved and they have I suppose a kind of an understanding or have something of to do with the outcome, basically. That they are involved. I think that's really important, isn't it? So it makes a difference. Laura said, thank you, Gurpreet, lovely information, strategy is very useful. Thank you, Laura. Is there anybody else? How would you deal with some
Jay, you were
people?
talking, there's somebody here, Phil. The other person chose not to speak to me. I found that was interesting what the issue was. I would say to you, Phil, that there is this what you're describing here has happened to me also. So it doesn't happen to just some of us. I think all of us have some version of this where the other person doesn't want to take part. And I will say that it creates a lot of internal conflict. It creates a lot of internal problems. Like you said, your mental health took a hit, as did mine at one point in time. And the best way is to work through our own internal conflict. So the idea that you cannot resolve a conflict, and it's a very good question, in fact, it's the idea that to resolve just because you're not able to resolve a conflict with someone else, you shouldn't end up in a conflict with yourself about it. Because a conflict, if I was to rate it, I would say a conflict with yourself has a higher, what's the word here? It has a higher capability to make your life miserable than a conflict with someone else. A conflict with yourself is always of greater intensity because you can't shut out the noise in your head. You can't shut out the voice in your head that is, in conflict with you. And that is always does greater harm. So the idea is to actually reduce the internal conflict. And if you think and you believe truly in your mind that you've done the best that you could to resolve the situation, then hopefully that can help you find a way out. It does not resolve the situation. I'm also in conflict where there is a situation couldn't be resolved. And we just have to accept that as a part of life. That's an existential problem as well, isn't it? The conflict cannot be resolved. And therefore, we have to live with it. So we can't resolve the conflict with someone else, but let's not end up in a conflict with myself because of it. There's a movie, The Few Good Men. I don't know if have you seen that movie, Few Good Men? It's Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. It's a very good film. It's a very good whodunit anyway. It's a very good, sorry, not whodunit. It's a very good court film. It's a great court case. And the guy says something at the end, which I've always found really helpful. He says to the guy, you don't need to wear a badge to have honor. And I won't kill the story for you because it's a really good movie and you could watch it. But I found that comment really helpful, that you don't need to wear a badge to have honor. So if you feel that you've done the right thing, then that can reduce your internal moral conflict, which can then make your life a little bit more peaceful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've got a question here, Gurpreet. How would you deal with someone difficult? When you just cannot, they will not accept, that there is an issue.
It goes along the same lines, Bina, which is you cannot resolve every conflict. And for two people to resolve their conflict, it requires them to come to the table. It requires it's the same thing that I was telling Phil, that because of your conflict with someone else, you shouldn't end up with an internal conflict, because that is much more damaging, because you start questioning yourself whether you did the right thing or not. And this is where, when I was talking about the conflict with the other, I talked about self-analysis.
Yeah.
And that is such an important stage, that you have to sit with yourself and be able to ask yourself, truly, have you done the right thing? And if you can't figure it out, then go see someone who will help you figure it out. Because I couldn't figure it out for myself. So I worked with someone else who could help me figure this out. So if you believe, with the help of someone else or on your own, that you've done the best thing you could, then be comfortable with that. Don't end up in a moral conflict with yourself. Don't end up in a conflict with yourself about values. And don't lose your self-respect through all that. That is the thing I think people forget about, that actually the internal conflict is so important to manage than the external one.
Yeah, because you can only change yourself, really, isn't it? You can't change everybody else. So yeah,
that is true. That is true.
Yeah.
That is in this presentation has so many offshoots, because the relationship itself is so important. We haven't talked about boundaries, which is such an important topic as well.
Yeah.
That there are so many offshoots from this presentation that you would go into about learning how to work with people. And Jay, you were talking about a very existential threat in an off license, in a place where you have external circumstances, intensifying a conflict of a very different kind. And in that instance, you just, it's about, I would rather go down the anger management solution over there and communication strategies over there to actually look at. And communication is something else. I mean, I can talk about communication for 2 days, frankly, but in communication, in that kind of a situation, what you were also referring to is customer, communication. Yeah. So if somebody's in your shop and, or you're off license and you need to communicate with them, how to communicate with them without losing your cool.
Absolutely.
You know, and the same thing applies in conflict, how to communicate what you want to say without losing your cool.
Yeah.
You know, and how to sidestep, you know, some of the, some not personalize some of the conflict situation, you know, some of the things, you know, because once people start name calling, then it quickly goes, the conflicts quickly go south, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in a customers driven alcohol induced situation, that is much more difficult to manage. But when you're having a conversation with a family member, one of the ground rules should be no name calling.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so it's not uncommon for couples to come into my counseling room and talk about name calling each other. And I'll say to them, I mean, would you call someone those names on a tube? I mean, we should try that sometimes and to see what results that will bring. And I said, if you won't call a stranger some of those names, why would you call each other those names? So the first thing I try to do away with in couple, situations is to stop getting people to call each other names.
Yeah.
And then, because, calling names also takes away the respect. So in family members, if you start doing name calling while you're having a conflict, then you're also you're escalating the situation. It's about de-escalating the situation. And we need to look at some of the anger management strategies on how to de-escalate situations.
Yeah. No, I had a very recent example with in one of the restaurant that is my client.
Yep.
And in fact, it opened about 5 weeks ago. So prior to opening, I interviewed about 10 different staff, from waiters to bar staff to chef, people working in the kitchen. And the client was quite happy for me to interview them and employ them, because he didn't have that skill. So he used me as a consultant to do that. And within 2 weeks of some of those staff working, and having gone there on a Friday night to observe the staff and the management of the restaurant, I found in a situation where the manager himself was getting very angry and very uptight, and was not his normal self, if you like. Even in his relationship with me had broken down. And I thought, well, so I tried to find myself, where does the problem lie? And actually the problem lied in that the management had taken a step forward, if you like, in terms of running a takeaway business for food, as opposed to running a restaurant, which is a totally different experience, if you like, and an expectation. So it was a step up for them to take on management of a restaurant. And I found a situation where I brought him down and said, look, I don't want our relationship to break down because of this conflict between us. Maybe I got something wrong. And I was, the root of the problem was he didn't understand that he had to step up himself as a manager of a restaurant rather than a manager of a takeaway food business, because dealing with customer is totally different. Dealing with staff is totally different in a restaurant. And until I made him understand that and said, you need to not run this business, you need to manage it. And management of staff is something different. So I brought him together and said, how am I going to find time for you to manage the restaurant rather than working in that restaurant? And once I cleared that, I had a chat with the staff and I said, you guys need to help this guy. He's not there to work. You are there to work for him, and give him some time, make time free for him so he can manage you guys. And once that worked, within a week, everything is sorted out.
Yeah. So if you look at the presentation that I just did,
Yeah.
which bullet would you pick up out of that?
I think he was trying to avoid it, and he was saying, if I avoid it and let it go on, staff would understand that they have to take on some of the responsibilities that he was doing.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is, listening to him and bringing my perspective and my expectation of him, rather than look at his perspective. So
Yeah.
once I had a good chat with him, he opened up a little bit about what his issues were.
Yeah.
And
So if I go with that, you yourself said he was trying to avoid,
Yes.
right? And then you listened to him,
Yeah.
right? So you turned up, and from your technique, this was collaboration, right?
Absolutely, it's those three orange circles I had to bring together into collaboration between the two of them.
Yeah,
And
so you had to, yeah, collaboration, plus you had added elements of expectation realignment.
Yeah.
Right, you had to realign expectations, right? So listening, expectation realignment, your own style of collaboration really helped.
Yeah.
And then it was just about creating the environment. So once the person who's avoiding, their defenses came down, his fear came down, you were able to bring him on board.
Absolutely.
Right, but it can't happen without someone in your capacity to do that.
Yeah.
So someone who can self-analyze and then try and understand the situation.
Yeah.
Often when somebody makes a leap to understand the situation, conflict can be handled much better.
Yeah.
But as long as people are dug in and I am right and you are wrong, or someone is to blame, but it's not me, as long as those things remain true, then conflicts remain unresolvable.
Yeah. I think
Well,
the lesson.
that's such a good example, isn't it? That's a brilliant, here's one I made earlier example. That's brilliant. So I've got a message from Claudette here quickly. This is an amazing presentation on a challenging topic. I'm going to try some of the strategies during my discussions with my grandson. Thank you, Gurpreet, for empowering me. That's your job done, Gurpreet. Well done. That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Claudette, for that, for your feedback, which is brilliant. I'm sure that's made Gurpreet's day today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's lots there to benefit from. I mean, it's just about thinking things through.
Yeah.
And like the one thing that you got to remember is that having a conflict doesn't mean the relationship is unhealthy. It just, in fact, in Jay's example, actually look at what the argument did. It actually realigned stuff. It brought out a better way of working with each other. Yeah. So conflicts, when they are good, actually can be really helpful. I think that's the thing that people got to remember. But when you're having the conflict, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But it's brilliant. Thank you. We've got 1 minute to spare. I'm just going to quickly say to everybody, please do look on our ARCC website for upcoming events and activities. Lots and lots of stuff going on. And we do have a recording of this. So, please do have a look on our YouTube channel where you can review this again. I think Gurpreet has given us lots and lots of tips to work with to manage conflict in our lives. And just to let you know, we've got our mental health first aid. The second cohort is happening in May, late May. So the course usually costs around £300. So we're actually running it for free as part of our project. So if you did want to become a mental health first aider, please do drop me a line and I'll see about getting you registered. So that's it from me, and thank you so much for joining us this Bank Holiday Monday, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.